First up, we're going to have Geremy Farr-Wharton. So I'll hand it over to you now.
Excellent. Thanks, Pete. Hey everyone, I'm Geremy Farr-Wharton. I'm here to talk to you about my research and the possible future endeavours that I intend on pursuing in the future. So my research entitled, and this is my doctoral thesis title, it's Opportunities for Mobile and Social Media to Reduce Domestic Food Waste. Now, have you ever wondered why we waste food? Has anyone ever contemplated that? I think what I'd like you all to do is to have an idea in your mind about the process that we might go through in domestic settings that leads to food waste. So, first of all, let's have a look at the facts. We go to the shops, we purchase some food, we bring it home, we store that food, we then cook it up, depending on whatever we want to cook for a certain meal or whatever it turns out to be. We then make the meal and we eat it. Whatever we don't eat, generally we store away or we might throw away. And that turns out to be food waste. That food waste, unfortunately, but inevitably, ends up here in landfills. Now, there's a bit of facts behind this, but I won't go into that just yet. More at the end of the slide. Now, the thing is, food waste, because of the nature of it and because of our food systems, our global food systems are neither environmentally, socially, or economically sustainable. Now with this, let's take a look at this and really bring it in. So 25% of the annual food supply is wasted each year. That equates in Australia to 5 billion AUD. Right? $5 billion are wasted in domestic food. Translates to roughly 20 to 40% of the household rubbish. Right? So food waste accounts to 20 to 40% of the household rubbish. In other nations across the world, particularly in Europe, that goes from 20 to 60%, and in some places even higher. Now, in addition to that, food waste accounts for approximately 20% of landfill capacities. And so may not be a big issue in the smaller scheme of things, but when you think about this, rotting food in landfills produces methane gas. Now, landfills themselves produce roughly 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions each year. So it adds up, it really does. So my project, the motivations for it were around environmental sustainability. Of course, there are other factors with this, but that was my main endeavour from the very beginning. So, why do we waste food? I asked you guys before to think about why, or what processes you might go through in order to, procure food, cook it, store it, whatever else, but how does it actually end up in as food waste in either landfill or compost or something along those lines. Now, they do believe that, or rather it is believed that consumer behaviours significantly lead to this. Now, when we think about it, we have food, we procure food, right? There are 3 identified factors that we found to promote behaviours leading to food waste, at least domestic food waste. Now, the first one was food supply. We have a food supply. But do we actually know what we have in it? So in our fridge, can you think of everything that you may have in your fridge? How about, can you think about where it might actually be located? In either the fridge or the pantry. So food location was another aspect that we found that led to, promoting behaviours resulting in food waste. And more than that, food literacy. This was the 3rd factor that we identified. Now, food literacy refers to 2 specific things. Firstly, do you know how to use the food that you have in your fridge? For example, if you have half an onion left to cook with, do you know how you could utilise that onion instead of needing a full onion, I don't know, for spaghetti or whatever else that you want to make that evening or for that particular meal time? More than that, do you know how to judge its edibility? So for example, who would go to the supermarket and pick up an apple, notice it's got a blemish on it, put it back down and find one that's shiny? Can we actually judge it? What happens if we take that apple home and it's in the fridge because we forgot about it and we put it right to the back? Could you actually, after 3 weeks, pull it out and still happily eat it? Good question. How about milk? How about any other product that might be dairy that's more of a high turnover food? Are we sure that we can judge food's edibility? Sorry. So this is referring to a person's food literacy. Now, again, those are the major factors that we identified, but they weren't the only ones. So, current food supply knowledge. Does a consumer actually realise all the items that are in their fridge? Now, this becomes particularly important because, generally speaking, in family households, not just family households, but in family households, there's generally only one person that goes to buy all the food. And there is only one person that then goes to store that food. Sometimes you get 2 people, but the idea behind this is that maybe whoever's buying food, whoever's then storing that food, maybe no one else in the household knows everything that's available to eat. So maybe they only look or glance at the front of the fridge and they pull out items that they have or that they can quickly make or quickly consume. So in addition to that, we also identified 2 minor factors. Now, unplanned events, these things happen, right? So we essentially, we may buy food for an entire week if we go shopping in bulk. However, for whatever reason, brother-in-law drops in and you end up going out to dinner one night. So the food that you bought for a particular mealtime can't be consumed anymore, at least would be pushed back anyway. And that food generally stays in the fridge or pantry and generally expires. Not always, but generally. And another aspect is, has anyone ever cooked, I mean, we've all been university students at one stage, I'm sure. So we've all cooked spaghetti or something along those lines to last maybe 5 meals. And then we get sick of it after, say, 2 or 3, right? And then we don't eat the other 2 or however many's left. So no desire to eat food was another minor factor, but those 2 are referred to as minor because they had a less of an impact on domestic food waste than the major aspects. So can we actually reduce domestic food waste? Well, so my project was about looking at how technology can build on human-computer interaction, and not necessarily technology as a whole, but how interventions can build on human-computer interaction in order to reduce domestic food waste, or at least impact or influence those 3 factors that I identified before. So, firstly, the interventions that we investigated. Firstly, there was the Colour Code project. Now, this dealt with essentially just the fridge. And we had 7 sheets of coloured plastic. Each of those sheets represented a different food type. For example, green represented produce, red represented meat, purple represented seafood, etc., etc. Now, we installed this into a fridge, and the idea was that it was completely customizable by the participants, and they could divide up sections, but the idea is only food that is meant to go on those items, on the food types, can actually be placed on it. Now, that is to say, if there is a green space, only produce could go there. If it was black, only leftovers could go there. Really, really interesting project and had really interesting findings. Now, this particular project dealt with food location. Okay, so that was one of the factors we identified before. It wasn't the first, but it dealt specifically with food location, where items could be easily located in the fridge, depending on when you open the door or pantry or whatever. Now, the image that you see up there is an example of the plan that the photos behind actually demonstrated. So the idea, you probably can't make it all, maybe you can actually, it's a bit clearer than my screen. But essentially, you could place items on there. Everyone saw this before they opened up the fridge. And that was an interesting fact. Now I'll get to some insights at the end of the slide, but I'll go through some more. So the next project we did was Fridge Cam. Now, as the name suggests, we actually embedded a camera within the fridge, and this took photos, regular photos, every time the fridge door was open. And it would just display it to your website, pretty interesting stuff. I've got to give compliments to Eva Gangelbar for this because it was her prototype that she actually gave to us in order to use. So what I got out of this was looking at whether food supply knowledge would actually improve, prevent or reduce the risk of people buying or purchasing items when they go to a grocery outlet. So the idea behind it was that many people were double buying and they were stockpiling food items because they didn't realise what they had in their food supply already. So for example, maybe they had butter, they weren't sure when they went to a grocery outlet like Woolworths or Coles or IGA, am I allowed to say those specific names? And they would end up buying another tub of butter or milk or whatever it may have been. And they come home, they realise, and all of a sudden they have doubled up and they generally use the newer product, they wouldn't use the older product. Really interesting. So again, that dealt with food supply. Colour Code project dealt with food location. So the next idea was to look at a commercial app that may have been able to look at all the different aspects that we're looking at, all the different factors that we identified. So food location, food supply, and food literacy. Now, the idea behind this is that you have a virtual space where you can upload any items that you may have in your inventory, as well as manage, removing them or whatever else. And being able to see when you go into grocery outlets, see what you have in there. Some major issues with this is keeping it up to date. Now, adding items, you can scan it in by barcode, as long as it's an American product. So with Coke it works, with say Norco milk, it wouldn't work. However, it would also inform you and give you an SMS when something is about to expire. So kind of useful as well. Another application we looked at was leftover swap. Now this deals with, believe it or not, swapping food in social situations. We actually looked at this application, how it might be used, or food sharing rather, in our specific research lab. It had some interesting findings, but I'll leave that. But there's actually, all of these have been published, so you can find all of the information here. In addition to that, we also looked at building our own prototype and putting that out there. And the idea behind this was it built upon what FoodCHI provided, in that it tried to give people the benefits of finding recipes and then how to use those recipes depending on what was actually expiring soon in the refrigerator or pantry or all the other food supply storage areas. In addition to that, it provided an area called FoodScope, which gave people the ability to share food that they knew they weren't going to eat anymore if it was going to expire and went across. So some interesting insights from that. Intervention insights, so food location knowledge has a greater impact than food supply knowledge. Food waste management applications should be co-located with storage. That was quite interesting. Essential for food waste management applications to stay up to date automatically if it can. And research insights, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There just isn't. Maintaining practice is helped by fellow household members. So, for example, with the Colour Code project, it's a hell of a lot easier to get people continually and maintaining their behaviours if other household members are getting angry at them for not, if that makes sense. Informing consumers of their practices does not necessarily translate into actions to reduce food waste. Future research direction. So this is an area that I'd like to go down in the future. So the role of social media. Firstly, we would like to explore different strategies consumers use to reduce their food waste within external and also domestic settings, and the role that social media technologies can actually play in facilitating that or motivating those practices. So, for example, using Twitter or Facebook or whatever it might be, and of course their smartphones. And secondly, I would like to explore assisting consumers to reduce industry and waste. Now, what am I actually talking about there? So, the food industry has a major impact on food wastes, with just one of Australia's largest food grocery outlets throwing away more than 900 million a year. That's quite a bit. We want to explore the strategies that may improve the grocery shopping experience for consumers in order to improve industry. Now, well, rather industry and efficiency. Now, what I mean by that is if we are able to get consumers shopping more efficiently and the industry knows what they're buying and before the consumer walks into the store, perhaps we can actually target advertising and whatever else in order to encourage specific purchases of items, and therefore industry doesn't have to stockpile their food. Essentially, they know a lot more of what their customers are wanting, and yeah. So that's pretty much it from me. Are there any questions? What are your questions? One at the back.
And looking forward in your research, have you thought about looking at people that do the dumpster diving for food outside?
So
it's really great. And I mean, I have friends that take pictures of the food that they get, and it's incredible.
So there's actually an anthropologist who's currently doing that over in Chicago at the moment. Really interesting stuff. But I must say, after so identifying those factors that we did, there was a bit of that, but in the domestic settings, and I must say there is only so much food waste I can actually handle. That's my stomach can handle, and some of those, it was in the middle of summer that we did it, and those bins weren't emptied for a week, and yeah, so I imagine that'll be somewhere in the future, but we'll see what happens. But I'd say it's definitely something that's needed, and particularly for food sharing, it's a really interesting area. Yeah. Any other questions?
I was just wondering if you looked at that Right Near Me application.
I don't think I have yet. Is that new?
Yeah, it was launched this year, and basically it's where if you have like too much fruit on your fruit tree, for example, you can post up, I have too many apples on my tree, and you can say if you're going to give them away, or if you're selling them more, or if you want to trade. And if you have, let's say in your garden you have too much spinach, you can trade my apples, sort of thing. So
Awesome.
it's in Brisbane as well. It's worth checking out. And Costa from the gardening programs involved with it. And I've actually found it really useful to use.
Yeah, that's really cool. Actually, I'd love to hear more of that, and I'd love to see it. Definitely those are the applications that we need to reduce domestic food waste. I mean, does anyone in here grow their own food? I'm sure there must be a couple, yeah. So I end up waiting months and months for garlic, and then 2 days for tomatoes, or 2 days for lettuce, or something like that.
Yeah, well, you have way too much basil.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think we need more of those applications in the future, but I haven't actually heard of that.
And one other thing is my friends and I have Facebook groups where we go on and we say, we have like leftover cow food, which is not garden, not just for shits and giggles. So we're already engaging in that, so I wondered if maybe it would be worth looking into if there were groups that have been set up.
Yeah, I'd say so.
To share things.
That's really interesting. So actually Eva Gangelbar, someone I mentioned earlier who developed the FoodCHI prototype, that was her area of research that she ended up going into, and she's found some amazing insights from it. It's a very interesting area, and the comfortability of people in sharing food and in what circumstances, it's quite interesting to see, because some people just aren't interested and too scared, or they don't trust the food that they're getting, or whatever. Actually there was one paper that's being published in FoodCHI this year that looks at those 3 different apps that I mentioned as the last couple, but particularly leftover swap, and in what circumstances people are quite interested to share food, and in what circumstances they're less comfortable, and how that actually translates to them sharing food. But they were only initial insights. So it's an area that is quite interesting, and I'd love to see what happens in the near future. Yeah. Any other questions?
I guess continuing on from that, do you see the future of this sort of technology moving more like into integration with current social media and mobile media applications, or?
I don't think there is any doubt that social media plays we're social beings, right? So I think definitely is my answer. So the fact that these applications are going towards that, we're seeing the beginnings of it, and I don't know where it will end, but I'd say definitely we've got got stuff to come. So yeah, it'll be interesting times. Was there another? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Some of the food waste is going to be inevitable, right? So have you looked at any of the social media or mobile apps for composting or?
No, I haven't, but that's because my research tried to identify the reasons that we produce the food waste that isn't inevitable. So stuff like, for example, coffee grounds, eggshells, banana peels, all of those are somewhat inevitable. Now, it's true to say that traditional methods of cooking, particularly in Asian countries or areas, they do look at integrating stuff that we would say is inevitable waste, such as bones and whatever else, but they are able to actually integrate some of that. I imagine it might be an area that picks up sooner or later, but I don't know how much attention it's going to get, just because there's that, I guess, persona of inevitability behind it, so I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, sorry. We can talk later if you like.
Please join me in thanking Geremy for his talk.